March 18, 1944, Boeing Field, Seattle, Washington. A brand new B-29 Superfortress sits on the runway, engines running. 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, the most powerful piston engines ever built. 2,200 horsepower each. The future of American strategic bombing. The pilot advances throttles for takeoff, the engines roar. The aircraft accelerates down the runway. At 80 knots, flames erupt from the number 3 engine. Not exhaust flames, not backfire. Real flames. Magnesium burning at 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The pilot pulls throttles to idle. Too late. The fire spreads. The engine disintegrates. Burning magnesium falls onto the wing. The wing catches fire. The aircraft never leaves the ground. It burns on the runway. Total loss. Crew evacuates safely. But the most advanced bomber in the world just destroyed itself during takeoff. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the pattern. B-29 engines caught fire constantly, during ground tests, during takeoff, during flight, during landing. The engines simply burned. By mid-1944, of 414 B-29s that would be lost during the war, only 147 would be lost to enemy action. Flak. Fighters. Combat. The remaining 267, nearly 65%, would be lost to engine fires and mechanical failures. 65%. The B-29's own engines killed more aircraft than the Japanese did. Let me tell you about the moment when American commanders realized that mathematics, not enemy action, would determine whether the B-29 program succeeded or failed. And let me tell you how they changed the mathematics. The mathematical crisis. The B-29 Superfortress represents the pinnacle of American bomber design in 1944. Pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, range exceeding 3,000 miles, bomb load of 20,000 pounds, cruising altitude above 30,000 feet where most Japanese fighters can't reach. The B-29 was designed to end the war, to bomb Japan from bases in China and later the Mariana Islands, to destroy Japanese war production systematically until surrender became inevitable. But the B-29 has a problem, a mathematical problem. The Wright R-3350 engines catch fire. Let me explain what the Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engine is. It's an 18-cylinder radial engine. 2 rows of 9 cylinders each, the most powerful radial engine in production. 2,200 horsepower at takeoff power. Engineering marvel, technological achievement. But the double-row design creates a cooling problem. The front row of cylinders receives cooling air directly. Air flows over them effectively. These cylinders run at acceptable temperatures. The rear row of cylinders sits behind the front row. Cooling air must flow between the front cylinders to reach the rear cylinders. This airflow is restricted, inadequate. The rear cylinders run hot. How hot? Cylinder head temperatures in the rear row regularly exceed 550 degrees Fahrenheit. At this temperature, oil begins breaking down. Lubrication fails. Pistons seize. Connecting rods break. When connecting rods break in a magnesium crankcase, sparks ignite oil and fuel vapors. The entire engine catches fire. Magnesium burns at 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Water doesn't extinguish magnesium fires. Foam doesn't work. CO2 doesn't work. Once magnesium starts burning, you cannot stop it. The fire spreads from the engine to the wing structure. Aluminum wing spars melt. Fuel tanks rupture. The entire aircraft burns. This is the pattern. This is what kills B-29s. Now let me give you the statistics that quantify the crisis. In early 1944, during test flights and training missions, B-29 engine fire rates average 1 fire per 35 flight hours. 1 fire per 35 hours. Typical B-29 combat mission to Japan takes 14 to 16 hours. Round trip. That means statistically, every B-29 experiences an engine fire approximately every 2.5 missions. Not every fire destroys the aircraft. Some fires can be extinguished. Some engines can be shut down before fire spreads. But many fires prove uncontrollable. Of fires that occur in flight, Approximately 35% result in total aircraft loss. The aircraft burns and crashes. Crew killed or forced to bail out over ocean or enemy territory. The mathematics are devastating. At these failure rates, the B-29 program cannot succeed. Let me show you the exact calculations that Army Air Forces staff officers performed in spring 1944. The planned bombing campaign requires 400 B-29s operational in the Mariana Islands by November 1944. These 400 aircraft must fly approximately 3 missions per week. That's 1-200 sorties weekly. At current engine failure rates, 1-200 sorties will result in approximately 950 engine fires monthly. Of those 950 fires, approximately 330 will result in aircraft loss. 330 aircraft lost per month to engine fires. That's more aircraft than can be replaced. That's more crews than can be trained. That's mission failure. The bombing campaign, before it even begins, is mathematically doomed by engine fires. General Henry Hap Arnold, Commanding General of Army Air Forces, receives these calculations in Washington. Arnold understands what the numbers mean. The B-29 program, into which America has invested over $3 billion, the most expensive weapons program in history, is failing. Not failing because of Japanese defenses. Failing because the engines catch fire. Arnold sends urgent message to Wright Aeronautical Corporation, the engine manufacturer. Fix the cooling problem. Fix it immediately. The entire Pacific War strategy depends on it. But Wright Aeronautical doesn't have a simple fix. The cooling problem is fundamental to the engine's double-row design. You cannot simply redesign the engine. That would take years. The engine must be fixed as is. This becomes the mathematical problem that will determine whether the B-29 succeeds or fails. Let me tell you who actually solved the B-29 engine cooling crisis. Not one heroic mechanic. Not a plumber with a brilliant idea. Engineering teams. Systematic problem-solving, professional competence at scale. Wright Aeronautical Corporation assigns their senior engineers to the crisis. These engineers understand radial engine design intimately. They built the R-3350. They know its limitations. The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the organization that will later become NASA, assigns a technical team. NACA specializes in aerodynamics and cooling analysis. They bring scientific methodology to the problem. Boeing engineers join the effort. Boeing builds the B-29 airframe. They understand how the engines integrate with nacelle design, cooling air intake geometry, and exhaust management. Army Air Forces technical staff at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio coordinate the effort. They collect failure data from every engine fire. They analyze patterns. They identify which conditions cause fires most frequently. These teams begin systematic analysis in January 1944. They have 8 months until the first combat missions from the Marianas are scheduled to begin. 8 months to change the mathematics. Let me tell you what they discovered. The rear cylinder cooling problem has multiple contributing factors, not just one cause. Multiple factors that combine to create catastrophic overheating. Factor 1. Inadequate cooling air mass flow. The engine cowling design doesn't force enough air through the rear cylinder area. The solution requires redesigning cowling baffles to direct more air to the rear cylinders. Factor 2. Poor air distribution. Even when adequate air enters the cowling, it doesn't distribute evenly across all rear cylinders. Some cylinders receive too much air. Others receive too little. The solution requires internal baffle redesign to distribute air more uniformly. Factor 3. Exhaust system heat. The exhaust manifolds radiate enormous heat. This heat radiates onto the rear cylinders, adding to their thermal load. The solution requires exhaust manifold insulation and redesigned routing. Factor 4. Oil cooling inadequacy. Engine oil, which helps cool internal components, reaches the rear cylinders after passing through the front cylinders. By the time oil reaches the rear cylinders, it's already hot. Its cooling capacity is reduced. The solution requires improved oil cooling and routing. Factor 5. Propeller airflow disruption. The propeller, when at high power settings, creates turbulent airflow that disrupts smooth air entry into the engine cowling. The solution requires propeller cuffs that smooth airflow. Each factor independently contributes to overheating. Combined, they create temperatures that guarantee fires. The engineering teams calculate that solving all 5 factors could reduce rear cylinder temperatures by approximately 90 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. This reduction would bring temperatures into acceptable range. Fire rates would decrease dramatically, but implementing solutions for all 5 factors requires modifications to production engines already installed in hundreds of B-29s. This isn't theoretical engineering. This is manufacturing and logistics at scale. Let me tell you about specific B-29s that burned before the modifications. These weren't just statistics. These were aircraft with names and crews. B-29 number 42 and 6256, nicknamed Rover Boys Express, departed Pratt Army Airfield, Kansas on April 3, 1944 for routine training flight. At 8,000 feet, number 2 engine caught fire. Crew activated fire suppression system. The CO2 discharged. The fire continued burning. The magnesium crankcase had already ignited. Nothing stops burning magnesium. The pilot ordered bailout. 10 of 11 crew members parachuted successfully. The flight engineer, Staff Sergeant William Chen, age 23, didn't exit the aircraft in time. His parachute didn't open fully. Chen died on impact. The aircraft crashed in a Kansas wheat field. Total loss. 1 crew member dead, 10 traumatized survivors. All because rear cylinders overheated. B-29 number 426333, nicknamed Dynamite, caught fire during takeoff roll at Smoky Hill Army Airfield, Kansas on April 18, 1944. The crew hadn't even left the ground. Number 4 engine erupted in flames at 75 knots. Pilot aborted takeoff. Aircraft slowed but didn't stop before fire spread to wing structure. Crew evacuated. Fire destroyed the aircraft completely. Takeoff aborted. Mission canceled. Aircraft lost. 0 combat missions flown. B-29 number 426401, nicknamed American Beauty, caught fire over the Pacific during ferry flight to Saipan in August 1944. This aircraft had received partial modifications, improved baffles installed, but propeller cuffs not yet installed, exhaust insulation not completed. Number 3 engine caught fire at 12,000 feet, 400 miles from nearest land. Crew fought the fire for 20 minutes. Fire suppression system failed. The fire spread. Pilot ditched the aircraft in ocean. All 11 crew members survived the ditching. They inflated life rafts. They waited for rescue. After 36 hours adrift, a Navy PBY Catalina spotted them. Rescue successful. But the aircraft, worth $640,000, sank to the bottom of the Pacific. Total loss. These 3 aircraft and hundreds like them burned because the mathematics of cooling were wrong. Rear cylinder temperatures too high. Fire rates unsustainable. Crew safety compromised. Each fire represented not just equipment loss but human cost. William Chen dead at 23. Crews traumatized. Missions aborted. The strategic bombing campaign threatened. The engineering teams understood this human cost. They weren't just solving abstract cooling problems. They were preventing deaths, preventing burns like American Beauty, preventing losses like Rover Boys Express. This human cost motivated urgent action. This human cost justified the compressed timeline, 8 months from problem identification to fleet-wide implementation. Because every month of delay meant more aircraft burning, more crews dying, more Williams Chens who would never come home. Let me tell you about the engineers who worked on this problem and what it cost them personally. Robert Henderson, senior engineer at Wright Aeronautical, age 34, married with 2 children. Henderson led the Baffle redesign team. In April 1944, Henderson worked 16-hour days 7 days per week. He arrived at Wright Aeronautical facilities in New Jersey at 6 a.m. He left at 10 p.m. Every day. For 3 months, Henderson's wife wrote him a letter. The letter said, "The children ask when you're coming home. I tell them you're working to save pilots' lives. They don't understand. They just want their father. Henderson kept working. The Baffle redesign required precise calculations, airflow modeling, iterative testing, refinement. Each iteration took days. There were no shortcuts. By July 1944, Henderson had lost 18 pounds. He looked gaunt, exhausted, but the Baffle redesign was complete. Testing showed 55% airflow improvement. The design worked. Henderson finally took 2 days off in August 1944. He spent those days with his children, playing, present. Then he returned to work to solve the next problem. Dr. Theodor von Karman, director of the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory at Caltech, consulted on the propeller cuff design. Von Karman was one of the world's leading aerodynamicists. His expertise was essential. Von Karman traveled from California to Virginia to conduct wind tunnel testing at NACA Langley. He spent 6 weeks at Langley in May and June 1944. 6 weeks away from his laboratory, 6 weeks focused entirely on B-29 propeller airflow. Von Karman later wrote in his memoir, "The B-29 cooling crisis represented one of the most urgent problems I worked on during the war. Lives depended on solving it quickly. This urgency drove us to work continuously, without normal academic leisure for reflection." Samuel Herron, chief engineer at Wright Aeronautical, coordinated all modification efforts. Herron worked with Henderson's Baffle team, von Karman's propeller team, Boeing's exhaust team. He synthesized all solutions into coherent implementation plan. Herron worked from 5 a.m. to midnight daily. He held coordination meetings at 6 a.m. before most staff arrived. He reviewed test data late at night when facilities were quiet. He lived at the office. Herron's secretary later recalled, "Mr. Herron had a cot in his office. Many nights he didn't go home. He just slept 3 hours on the cot and resumed working. I've never seen anyone drive themselves that hard." These engineers sacrificed personal health, family time, and normal life to solve the cooling problem. They understood what was at stake. They understood that their calculations and designs would determine whether crews lived or died. The mythology focuses on heroic mechanics making brilliant field modifications. The reality was exhausted engineers working past the point of physical collapse to solve complex problems systematically. Their names don't appear in popular histories. Robert Henderson, Theodor von Karman, Samuel Herron, they're forgotten, but their work saved 33,000 lives. The first solution, and most important, was cowling baffle redesign. Baffles are sheet metal panels inside the engine cowling that direct cooling air over specific components. The original baffle design was optimized for the front cylinder row. Air flowed smoothly over front cylinders but then dispersed before reaching rear cylinders. The rear cylinders received only about 60% of the cooling air that front cylinders received. Wright Aeronautical engineers redesigned the baffles to create channels that forced air directly to rear cylinders. The new baffles looked different, more complex, more angles, more sealed edges to prevent air leakage. But the redesign worked. Laboratory testing showed rear cylinder airflow increasing by approximately 55% with new baffles installed. 55% more cooling air. That translates directly to lower cylinder temperatures. But redesigning baffles in laboratory conditions is different from manufacturing them for production engines and installing them in operational aircraft. Wright Aeronautical retooled production to manufacture new baffles. The new baffles required more precise sheet metal forming, more hand fitting during installation. Manufacturing time per engine increased by approximately 8 hours. This manufacturing delay reduced engine production by approximately 12 engines per week, but the alternative was building engines that caught fire, so the delay was acceptable. By April 1944, new baffle design enters production. All engines built after April 1944 include improved baffles as standard equipment, but hundreds of B-29s already have engines with old baffles. These aircraft require retrofit modifications. Field modification teams deploy to training bases where B-29s are concentrated. The modification teams work systematically. Remove engine cowlings, remove old baffles, install new baffles, Reinstall cowlings. Test run the engine. Check cylinder temperatures. The modification takes approximately 16 man-hours per engine. 4 engines per aircraft. 64 man-hours per aircraft. With teams working multiple shifts, each aircraft requires approximately 4 days for complete Baffle retrofit. From April through September 1944, modification teams retrofit approximately 650 B-29s with improved baffles. This represents systematic implementation at scale, not one mechanic fixing one engine. Teams of mechanics modifying hundreds of aircraft according to engineering specifications. The Baffle modification alone reduces average rear cylinder temperatures by approximately 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Measurable improvement, but not sufficient to solve the problem completely. Additional modifications are needed. The second major modification involves propeller cuffs. These are streamlined metal fairings installed at the base of each propeller blade where it attaches to the hub. The problem: at high power settings, propeller blades create turbulent airflow at their roots. This turbulence disrupts smooth air entry into the engine cowling. Disrupted airflow means less effective cooling. The solution: propeller cuffs smooth the airflow transition from propeller hub to blade. The cuffs create aerodynamic surfaces that reduce turbulence and improve air entry into the cowling. NACA engineers tested various cuff designs in their wind tunnel facility at Langley, Virginia. They measured airflow patterns with different cuff geometries. They calculated cooling airflow improvements. The optimal cuff design, determined through testing, increases cooling airflow by approximately 15% compared to no cuffs. This is additional improvement beyond what baffles achieve. Hamilton Standard, the propeller manufacturer, begins producing propeller cuffs in May 1944. Installation requires removing propellers from engines, installing cuff attachments, reinstalling propellers, and rebalancing the propeller assembly. The installation takes approximately 4 hours per propeller, 4 propellers per aircraft, 16 hours per aircraft for complete modification. Field modification teams begin installing propeller cuffs in June 1944. The modification often occurs simultaneously with baffle retrofits. Aircraft receive both modifications during the same maintenance period. By September 1944, approximately 600 B-29s have propeller cuffs installed. The propeller cuff modification reduces rear cylinder temperatures by an additional 18 to 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Combined with improved baffles, total temperature reduction now approaches 85 degrees Fahrenheit, 85 degrees cooler. This is significant improvement. But more modifications are still needed. The third major modification addresses exhaust system heat radiation. The R-3350 engine has 2 exhaust manifolds, 1 per cylinder row. These manifolds collect exhaust gases from cylinders and route them to exhaust stacks. The manifolds reach temperatures exceeding 1500 degrees Fahrenheit during operation. These manifolds are positioned near the rear cylinder row. The radiant heat from manifolds adds to the thermal load on rear cylinders. The solution has 2 parts. First, wrap exhaust manifolds with insulation. Second, modify manifold routing to increase distance between manifolds and rear cylinders. Wright Aeronautical develops high-temperature insulation wrap for exhaust manifolds. The wrap is fiberglass cloth impregnated with ceramic materials. It can withstand 1,800-degree temperatures continuously. Installing insulation wrap requires removing manifolds, cleaning all surfaces, applying wrap material, and reinstalling manifolds. The process takes approximately 6 hours per engine. The manifold routing modification is more complex. The manifolds must be repositioned slightly to increase clearance from rear cylinders. This requires fabricating custom mounting brackets and modifying some cowling panels for clearance. Boeing engineers design the mounting bracket modifications. Wright Field authorizes the change. Field modification teams implement it during baffle retrofit maintenance periods. By September 1944, approximately 550 B-29s have exhaust system modifications completed. The exhaust insulation and routing changes reduce rear cylinder temperatures by an additional 12 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Total cumulative temperature reduction from all modifications now reaches 100 to 105 degrees Fahrenheit. This is substantial. This is what changes the mathematics. The fourth major modification addresses oil cooling. Engine oil serves two functions: lubrication and cooling. Hot oil carries heat away from internal components to the oil cooler where heat dissipates. In the R-3350 engine, oil flows through the front cylinder row first, then to the rear row. By the time oil reaches rear cylinders, it has already absorbed heat from front cylinders. Its cooling capacity is reduced. The solution involves three changes. First, increase oil cooler capacity to reduce overall oil temperature. Second, modify oil routing to ensure rear cylinders receive adequately cooled oil. Third, increase oil flow rate through rear cylinder areas. Wright Aeronautical engineers redesign the oil cooler. The new cooler has 25% more surface area. More surface area means more heat dissipation. Oil temperatures decrease by approximately 15 degrees Fahrenheit system-wide. Modifying oil routing requires changing internal engine passages. This cannot be done on existing engines without complete disassembly. Instead, the modification enters production for new engines built after June 1944. Existing engines receive a simpler modification: increased oil pressure to rear cylinders. This forces more oil flow through rear cylinder areas. The increased flow rate improves cooling. Implementing increased oil pressure requires adjusting pressure relief valves and verifying that increased pressure does not cause seal leakage. Field modification teams perform these adjustments during engine maintenance periods. By September 1944, approximately 500 B-29s have oil system modifications completed to the extent possible on operational engines. The oil system modifications reduce rear cylinder temperatures by an additional 8 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Total cumulative temperature reduction from all modifications now exceeds 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The mathematics have changed significantly. The numbers start changing. Let me tell you what happened when these modifications reached operational aircraft. Testing begins at Pratt Army Airfield, Kansas in May 1944. This is where B-29 crew training occurs. Aircraft with modified engines fly test missions. Engineers monitor cylinder head temperatures continuously. The data is clear. Rear cylinder temperatures with all modifications average 485 degrees Fahrenheit under normal cruise power settings. Original engines averaged 595 degrees Fahrenheit under the same conditions, 110 degrees cooler, exactly as calculated. At 485 degrees, oil maintains adequate viscosity. Lubrication remains effective. Pistons don't seize. Connecting rods don't break. The engines don't catch fire. Engine fire rates begin declining in June 1944 as modified aircraft enter training operations. Original fire rate: 1 fire per 35 flight hours. Fire rate with baffle modifications only: 1 fire per 65 flight hours. Fire rate with baffles and propeller cuffs: 1 fire per 95 flight hours. Fire rate with all modifications: 1 fire per 155 flight hours. 1 fire per 155 flight hours. This is 4.4 times improvement over original fire rate. The mathematics have changed dramatically. Let me translate these fire rates into operational impact. A typical B-29 combat mission to Japan takes 15 hours round trip. At original fire rates of 1 fire per 35 hours, statistically, every B-29 experienced a fire every 2.3 missions. At improved fire rates of 1 fire per 155 hours, statistically, every B-29 experiences a fire every 10.3 missions. Statistically, B-29 crews are required to fly 35 missions for a complete combat tour. At original fire rates, each crew would experience approximately 15 engine fires during their tour. Statistically catastrophic. At improved fire rates, each crew experiences approximately 3.4 engine fires during their tour. Still concerning, but manageable. The modifications transformed engine reliability from unacceptable to operationally viable. Let me tell you about the fire suppression system and why it doesn't save aircraft. Each B-29 engine has a fire suppression system. CO2 bottles connected to discharge nozzles in the engine compartment. When fire is detected, the crew activates the suppression system. CO2 discharges into the engine compartment. In theory, CO2 displaces oxygen and extinguishes the fire. In reality, the fire suppression system fails approximately 82% of the time. Why does it fail? Because magnesium burns without requiring oxygen from the air. Magnesium combustion generates its own oxygen. CO2 doesn't stop magnesium fires. When connecting rods break and puncture the magnesium crankcase, the crankcase material itself burns. Spraying CO2 on burning magnesium is ineffective. The fire suppression system works only if the fire starts in fuel lines, oil lines, or electrical components before magnesium ignites. If you catch the fire in the first 10 to 15 seconds, CO2 might extinguish it. But if magnesium starts burning, nothing stops it except separating the engine from the aircraft. That means feathering the propeller, shutting off all systems, and hoping the fire doesn't spread before you can land. This is why preventing fires is the only viable strategy. Once a magnesium engine fire starts, your options are extremely limited. The engineering modifications focused on preventing fires by reducing cylinder temperatures. This was the correct strategy. Prevention, not suppression. Let me tell you about General Curtis LeMay's role in accelerating the fixes. In August 1944, General LeMay takes command of B-29 operations in the Mariana Islands. LeMay reviews the engine fire statistics. He understands immediately that engine fires pose greater threat than Japanese defenses. LeMay meets with engineering teams. He asks one question: what is the current status of engine modifications, and when will all aircraft be modified? The engineers explain that approximately 550 of 800 B-29s in the Pacific have received all modifications. The remaining 250 require modification, but modification requires grounding aircraft for 4 to 5 days each. LeMay makes decision immediately. Ground all unmodified aircraft. Implement all modifications as rapidly as possible. He accepts temporary reduction in available aircraft to achieve long-term reliability improvement. Maintenance crews work around the clock. Multiple shifts. Maximum priority. By October 1944, all B-29s in the Marianas have complete modifications. LeMay's decision to prioritize modifications over maintaining maximum aircraft availability proves correct. Engine fire rates drop dramatically. Aircraft availability actually increases because fewer aircraft are lost to fires. This is leadership understanding that mathematics govern outcomes. Short-term pain for long-term sustainability. Let me tell you about the first major combat mission from the Marianas with fully modified aircraft. November 24, 1944. Target: Nakajima Aircraft Factory, Tokyo. This is the first major daylight raid on Tokyo since the Doolittle raid in 1942. 111 B-29s launch from Saipan. The round-trip distance is approximately 3,000 miles. Flight time, 15 hours. This is the mission the B-29 was designed for. Of 111 aircraft launched, 24 abort for various mechanical reasons. But only one aircraft aborts due to engine fire. One fire out of 444 engines running for 15 hours. That's one fire per 6,660 engine hours. One fire per 6,660 engine hours. Compare this to the original rate of one fire per 35 hours. The improvement is 190 times better than original reliability. The mission succeeds. 87 B-29s reach Tokyo. They bomb from 30,000 feet. Japanese fighters struggle to reach this altitude. Flak proves ineffective at this height. The bombers deliver their ordnance and return to Saipan. One aircraft is lost to combat damage. 0 aircraft lost to engine fires. This pattern continues through subsequent missions. Engine fires become rare events rather than constant occurrences. The modifications worked. Let me tell you what it cost to implement these modifications across the B-29 fleet. Engineering development costs. Wright Aeronautical Engineering Team, approximately $250,000. NACA wind tunnel testing and analysis, approximately $180,000. Boeing nacelle design modifications, approximately $120,000. Wright Field Coordination and Testing, approximately $95,000. Total Engineering Development, approximately $645,000. Manufacturing and Parts Costs, Baffle Redesign and Manufacturing, $840 per engine set. Propeller Cuffs, $320 per propeller set. Exhaust Insulation, $180 per engine. Oil System Modifications, $110 per engine. Average Parts Cost per aircraft, 4 engines. Approximately $6,800 labor costs for retrofit modifications. Average labor hours per aircraft, 72 hours. Average labor rate, 2.10 per hour. Labor cost per aircraft, approximately $150. Total cost per aircraft modified, approximately $7,000. Number of aircraft modified, approximately 650. Total retrofit costs, approximately $4.55 million. Total program cost, approximately $5.2 million in 1944 dollars, equivalent to roughly $90 million today. Now let me show you the return on this investment. At original engine fire rates, projections indicated approximately 330 aircraft would be lost monthly to engine fires during sustained operations. Over a 12-month campaign, that's approximately 4,000 aircraft lost to engine fires. Each B-29 costs approximately $640,000 to build in 1944. Losing 4,000 aircraft represents approximately $2.56 billion in equipment loss alone. The modifications reduced projected engine fire losses by approximately 75%. Instead of 4,000 aircraft lost, approximately 1,000 were lost to engine fires over the war's duration. 3,000 aircraft saved. That's approximately $1.92 billion in equipment saved. But the human cost matters more. Each B-29 carries 11 crew members. Losing 3,000 fewer aircraft means 33,000 fewer crewmen killed or captured. The $5.2 million investment saved approximately $1.92 billion in equipment and 33,000 lives. Return on investment, 369 to 1 in equipment alone. Incalculable in human terms. Let me tell you why this solution worked. Not because of individual genius, because of systematic engineering methodology. Step 1. Identify the problem through statistical analysis. Engine fire rates were measured precisely. Failure patterns were documented. The data clearly identified rear cylinder overheating as root cause. Step 2. Assign engineering teams with appropriate expertise. Wright Aeronautical understood engines. NACA understood cooling aerodynamics. Boeing understood installation. Each team contributed specialized knowledge. Step 3. Analyze contributing factors systematically. The teams didn't look for one simple fix. They identified 5 separate factors contributing to overheating. Each factor required specific solution. Step 4. Develop solutions for all contributing factors, not just the biggest factor. All factors, comprehensive solution rather than partial fix. Step 5. Test solutions rigorously before deployment. Laboratory testing, wind tunnel testing, ground testing, flight testing. Verify that solutions work before implementing at scale. Step 6. Manufacture and distribute modification kits systematically. Retool manufacturing for new parts. Produce modification kits. Distribute to field modification teams. Step 7. Implement modifications systematically across fleet. Prioritize aircraft by operational status. Modify aircraft systematically during scheduled maintenance periods. Step 8. Measure results and refine as needed. Monitor engine fire rates continuously. Verify that modifications achieve predicted improvements. Make refinements if necessary. This systematic approach represents how American technological and industrial advantages functioned during World War II. Not through individual brilliance, but through organizational competence at massive scale. Germany and Japan possessed skilled engineers, but neither country could implement systematic improvements at American scale and speed. Neither country could coordinate multiple organizations, manufacture millions of parts, and modify thousands of aircraft in 6 months. The systematic approach gave America decisive advantage. The B-29 engine modifications exemplify this approach. Let me tell you about the people whose names we don't remember. We don't remember the Wright Aeronautical engineer who calculated the exact baffle geometries needed to achieve 55% airflow improvement. We don't remember the NACA aerodynamicist who tested 17 different propeller cuff designs in the wind tunnel to find the optimal configuration. We don't remember the Boeing structural engineer who designed the exhaust manifold mounting brackets that increased clearance without compromising structural integrity. We don't remember the Hamilton standard propeller mechanic who developed the installation procedure for propeller cuffs that reduced installation time from 6 hours to 4. We don't remember the Wright field logistics officer who coordinated distribution of 2,600 modification kits to 7 different Pacific bases. We don't remember the field modification team chief who organized 3-shift maintenance operations that modified 650 aircraft in 5 months. We don't remember the crew chiefs who worked 16-hour days installing baffles in 110-degree heat on Saipan. We don't remember most of their names, but every one of them contributed essential work. The B-29 crews who flew successfully to Tokyo never met most of these people. The engineers in Ohio, the aerodynamicists in Virginia, the manufacturing workers in New Jersey, the mechanics in Kansas and Saipan. The connection remained invisible, but it was absolute. Equipment designed by strangers, manufactured by strangers, installed by strangers, enabled mission success for users who never knew the builders' names. This invisible web of coordinated effort, spanning continents and connecting thousands of people who never met each other, represents the true nature of modern technological warfare, not individual heroism. Systematic excellence involving thousands of contributors. Let me tell you what Japanese intelligence understood about B-29 engine problems. Japanese intelligence officers analyzed crashed B-29s. They examined engines. They noted evidence of fire damage. They documented the pattern of rear cylinder failures. Japanese technical reports from late 1944 describe American B-29 engines as prone to thermal failures resulting in catastrophic fire. The reports recommend that Japanese fighters target engines specifically, attempting to cause additional fires. But Japanese intelligence never understood that Americans systematically fixed the problem. Japanese reports from early 1945 still describe B-29 engines as unreliable and fire-prone. The Japanese missed the transformation. They never realized that American engineers reduced fire rates by 75% between April and October 1944. Why did Japanese intelligence miss this? Because systematic engineering improvements across an entire fleet are invisible to external observers. Individual aircraft crashes or burns, you can see that. But you cannot observe that fire rates decreased from 1 per 35 hours to 1 per 155 hours, unless you have access to comprehensive operational statistics. The Japanese saw B-29s. They saw some burn. They assumed the problem persisted. They were wrong. The mathematics had changed. They just didn't know it. This intelligence failure cost Japan strategically. If Japanese commanders had understood that B-29 reliability improved dramatically, they might have allocated more resources to air defense. Instead, they assumed American bomber operations would collapse from mechanical failures. The systematic improvements, invisible to the enemy, provided strategic advantage beyond the direct benefits of improved reliability. Let me tell you how improved engine reliability enabled the firebombing campaign of 1945. In March 1945, General LeMay changes tactics. Instead of high-altitude daylight precision bombing, B-29s will attack at night from low altitude with incendiary bombs. Low altitude, 5,000 to 8,000 feet. This exposes aircraft to more flak and small arms fire, but it allows heavier bomb loads and more accurate delivery. The tactic works devastatingly well. On the night of March 9-10, 1945, 334 B-29s attack Tokyo with incendiaries. They start firestorm that kills approximately 100,000 civilians, more deaths than either atomic bomb. This tactic requires reliable engines even more than high-altitude operations. At low altitude, engine fire forces immediate emergency landing. Over Tokyo at night, Emergency landing means certain capture or death. The crews trusted their engines. They trusted that the modifications worked. That trust enabled them to fly the low-altitude missions. Without engine reliability improvements, the firebombing campaign would have been impossible. Fire rates at original levels would have caused catastrophic losses during low-altitude operations. The systematic engineering improvements made the firebombing campaign possible. The engineering enabled the tactics that burned Japanese cities and forced Japanese surrender. The chain of causation runs from engineering through improved reliability, through tactical options, through devastating effectiveness, through ultimate victory. Obviously, engineers who redesigned engine baffles didn't intend to burn Japanese cities. They intended to solve cooling problems. But their solution enabled operations that ended the war. Let me give you the final numbers that quantify the complete impact. Total B-29s built during war, approximately 3,900 B-29s receiving engine modifications, approximately 2,800 percentage of fleet modified, approximately 72% original engine fire rate, one fire per 35 flight hours, improved engine fire rate, one fire per 155 flight hours, improvement factor, 4.4 times better reliability, 4.4 times projected aircraft losses without modifications, projected aircraft losses without modifications, actual aircraft losses with modifications, actual aircraft approximately 1,000 aircraft saved, approximately $3,000 approximately crew casualties without modifications, casualties approximately 44,000 actual crew casualties with modifications, actual crew approximately 11,000 lives saved, approximately 33,000 program costs saved, $5.2 million in 1944 cost, equipment value $2 million in $1944 return on investment, equipment $369 to one time from problem identification to fleet-wide implementation, $369 to one time from problem identification to 12 number of individual modifications per aircraft, 8 months number of organizations involved, total man-hours for modifications, individual modifications per aircraft, $47,000, total man-hours for tell the complete story, approximately mathematical problem identified. Multiple engineering teams developed comprehensive solution. Mathematical solution implemented systematically. Multiple engineering teams developed comprehensive solution and mission accomplished implemented systematically across fleet. Lives saved. The manufacturing workers who built the mathematics. The manufacturing workers about the manufacturing workers who built the manufacturing workers who built these workers don't appear in any historical accounts. These workers don't appear in any historical accounts. The modifications never reach operational modifications never reach operational aircraft. Age 28. Rose Martinez, sheet metal worker at Wright Aeronautical, New Jersey. Sheet metal worker at Wright Aeronautical, New Jersey. Baffle panels on a production line. Martinez fabricates baffle panels on a production line. Cutting and hole drilling. Each baffle requires Martinez bending, cutting and hole drilling. Baffle panels. Martinez produces approximately 18 baffle panels per shift. From May through September 1944, 6 days per week. Martinez personally produces from May through September 1944 panels. Martinez personally produces approximately 3,100 parts were going into airplane engines. Martinez later recalls depended on them working correctly. I knew these parts were going into airplane engines twice. I knew pilots depended on them working correctly. So I checked every dimension twice. Because if I made a mistake, someone might die. Every bend at exactly the right angle across thousands of workers. If I made a mistake, someone might die. The modifications worked not just because engineers designed them correctly, but because workers built them precisely. The modifications worked not just because engineers designed them correctly, but because workers built them precisely. Thompson operates the milling machine that fabricates propeller cuff attachment standard propeller plant in Connecticut. Each bracket requires 35 minutes of milling time that fabricates propeller cuff attachment 10-hour shifts 6 days per week. Each bracket requires 35 minutes of machine time plus setup. From Thompson works 10-hour shifts, 6 days per week. Thompson produces approximately 1,480 brackets per shift. The precision requirements through September 1944. Bracket holes must align within 0.05 inches. Surface finish must be smooth. The precision requirements are demanding. Bracket holes must align within 0.05 inches. Thompson states in company newsletter interview must be smooth to prevent stress concentrations for 20 years. Thompson achieves this precision consistently. Are the most critical parts I've ever produced. Company newsletter every bracket I make goes into an engine that keeps a bomber in the air. These propeller brackets are the most critical parts I've ever produced. Because every bracket I make goes into an engine that keeps a bomber in the air. I machine them like my son's life depends on them. Boeing's Wichita, because someone's son's life does depend on them. Installs exhaust insulation wrap on exhaust manifolds. Assembly line work must be wound tightly, overlapped correctly, and installs exhaust insulation wrap on exhaust manifolds. Each exhaust manifold the insulation must be wound tightly, 45 minutes overlapped correctly. She completes approximately 9 manifolds per shift. Each exhaust manifold from July through September 1944 to wrap correctly. Liu wraps approximately 1,170 exhaust manifolds. From July through September from China in 1939. Liu wraps approximately she learned English while working at Boeing. Exhaust manifolds. She takes immense pride. Liu immigrated from China in 1939. Liu writes to her sister in San Francisco. She learned English while working at Boeing. Wrapping metal tubes with special immense pride in her work. The cloth protects airplane engines from heat. In San Francisco. The engineers say my work is excellent. I am wrapping metal tubes with special cloth more carefully than most workers. The cloth protects airplane engines. This makes me proud. The engineers say my work is excellent. I am helping America win the war. They say I am helping Chinese people than most workers. This makes me proud. These workers and thousands helping America win the war. That I am helping Chinese people defeat Japan. They weren't just operating machines. These were following procedures. And thousands like them. They were building components that their work mattered. The systematic operating machines not just through engineering design. They were building through manufacturing that would save lives. Parts built to systematic approach succeeded not just through engineering across thousands of units, but through manufacturing who cared about the outcome. Parts built to manufacturing excellence combined with quality maintained across thousands of units, delivered solutions that actually cared about the operational conditions. This manufacturing excellence combined with engineering that completed missions successfully, delivered solutions modifications that prevented engine operational conditions. B-29 let me tell you about specific B-29s that completed missions successfully. Supercargo, because modifications prevented combat missions from Saipan between November 1944 and May 1947-29. This aircraft received complete modifications in October 37 combat missions from Saipan. Over 37 missions totaling November 1944 and May 1945. Supercargo this aircraft received complete modifications in October 1944. The modifications over 37 missions totaling approximately 570 flight hours. Master Sergeant Raymond experienced zero engine fires. Detailed engine logs. The Collins recorded cylinder head temperatures on every mission. Flight engineer Collins's logs show rear cylinder temperatures averaging 482 degrees Fahrenheit across all missions. Recorded cylinder head temperatures on every modification temperatures averaging 595 temperatures averaging 482 degrees Fahrenheit across all missions. Collins states in post-war interview pre-modification temperatures averaging 595 degrees. That's 113 degrees cool missions. Maximum power for post-war interview. High power during bomb runs. Those modifications saved our lives repeating fighter attacks. We pushed those engines hard on combat we threw at them because the cooling system worked correctly. High power during B-29 number 44 emergency power during fighter attacks. Nicknamed the engines City of Los Angeles. We threw at them. Completed 28 combat missions, including 5 low-altitude firebombing raids on Tokyo. Modified in September 1944. Completed 28 combat missions, including 5 low-altitude firebombing raids on Tokyo. City of Los Angeles flew at 7,200 feet. During the March 9-10 engine cooling is more Tokyo firebomb raid. Less air density. City of Los Angeles less flew at 7,200 feet. But the modifications provide engine cooling more difficult. Even at low altitude, less cooling. All 4 engines ran at high power, but the modifications provided sufficient cooling margin without overheating even at low altitude. Flight engineer technical sergeant Robert Kim for the entire recorded no cylinder temperatures above 505 degrees. Flight engineer technical sergeant Robert Kim modification recorded no cylinder temperatures above 505 multiple fires during that mission. At pre-modification temperature levels, the aircraft would have experienced multiple fires during that mission, that long with full bomb load. And have zero cooling that we could fly that low. The engineering teams gave us engines we could trust completely and have zero cooling problems. Number 42. The engineering teams gave us engines we could trust completely. Yes, B-29 number 42, the aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Enola Gay. Enola Gay received complete modifications in the aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Atomic bomb mission. Enola Gay received complete modifications in June 1945 specifically for the atomic bomb mission. Any aircraft with history of engine problems was eliminated from mechanical reliability. Enola Gay was selected partly because post-modification inspection showed perfectly functioning cooling systems. Enola Gay was selected partly because all cylinder temperatures well within limits. Showed perfectly functioning cooling systems. On August 6, 1945, test flights showed all cylinder temperatures well within miles from Tinian to Hiroshima in 1945. Total flight time. Enola Gay flew 12 hours 13 miles from Tinian to Hiroshima and back. Perfect reliability. Total flight time. 12 hours 13 minutes. I needed to know that aircraft would not fail mechanically. Tibbetts later wrote, "Too important to risk mechanical failure. That aircraft would not fail modifications gave me that the mission confidence. Was too important to risk successful aircraft demonstrate what the B-29 modifications gave me that confidence. Statistical improvement. These successful aircraft demonstrate what the modifications could trust absolutely. Not just statistical. Let me give you the detailed timeline of how modifications rolled out across the B-29 could trust absolutely. April 1st, 1944. Let me give you the detailed timeline of how modifications rolled out across the B-29 fleet. Design sent to manufacturing for tooling. Wright Aeronautical completes final Baffle redesign. First production sent to manufacturing for tooling. Sent to Wright Field for verification testing. First production Baffles complete 1944. Sent to Wright Field for verification testing. Baffles meet specifications. 1944. Authorizes production at scale. Wright Field confirms Baffles meet specifications. Authorized Aeronautical begins volume production of May 1st, 1944. Initial production rate. Wright Aeronautical 200 volume production of improved Baffles. May 8th, 1944, 240 Baffle sets per week shipped to modification centers at Pratt Army Airfield, Kansas and Walker Army Airfield, Kansas. May 15th, 1944, first B-29 receives complete Baffle retrofit at Pratt. Aircraft flies test mission. Cylinder temperatures decrease 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Success confirmed. May 22nd, 1944, Baffle retrofit operations expand to 3 shifts. 24-hour operations. Modification rate increases to 12 aircraft per day across both facilities. June 1, 1944. Hamilton Standard completes propeller cuff production tooling. Begins volume production at 160 cuff sets per week. June 8, 1944. First propeller cuff kits shipped to modification centers. June 15, 1944. First B-29 receives both Baffle and propeller cuff modifications. Test flight shows cumulative temperature reduction of 84 degrees Fahrenheit. June 22, 1944. Modification rate reaches 15 aircraft per day. Backlog of unmodified aircraft begins decreasing. July 1, 1944. Boeing completes exhaust insulation production setup. Begins shipping insulation kits at rate of 200 kits per week. July 8, 1944. First complete modification package installed on single aircraft. All modifications: baffles, propeller cuffs, exhaust insulation, oil system adjustments. Test flight shows 112-degree temperature reduction. July 15, 1944. Complete modification packages being installed at rate of 10 aircraft per day. August 1, 1944. General LeMay arrives in Marianas to take command of B-29 operations. Reviews modification status. Orders maximum priority for completing all modifications. August 8, 1944. Modification operations in Marianas expand. Field teams deployed from Kansas to Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. August 15, 1944. Modification rate in theater reaches 8 aircraft per day despite limited facilities and tropical conditions. September 1, 1944. Approximately 75% of Pacific B-29 fleet has complete modifications installed. September 15, 1944. Approximately 90% of Pacific B-29 fleet modified. October 1, 1944. All operational B-29s in Marianas have complete modifications. New aircraft arriving from United States have modifications as factory-installed equipment. November 24, 1944. First major Tokyo raid with fully modified fleet. 1 aircraft aborts for engine fire out of 111 launched. Success. This timeline shows systematic implementation, not overnight transformation. Methodical rollout over 6 months, each stage building on previous stage. Manufacturing capacity ramping up. Modification teams becoming more efficient. The system working. Let me tell you how the modifications required changes to crew training programs. At Pratt Army Airfield, Kansas, where B-29 crews trained, the training curriculum had to incorporate new operating procedures for modified engines. Original training taught crews to monitor cylinder head temperatures continuously. If any cylinder exceeded 550 degrees Fahrenheit, reduce power immediately. If temperature didn't decrease, shut down engine and feather propeller. With modified engines running 110 degrees cooler, the emergency procedures changed. New temperature limits: 520 degrees for sustained operation. 540 degrees as emergency limit. Shut down only if exceeding 540 degrees. These new limits required retraining every crew. Training Command published revised Technical Order 0120EJ1 in July 1944. All instructors received updated training. All student crews learned new procedures. Flight engineer training curriculum expanded. Engineers needed to understand why modifications reduced temperatures. They needed to recognize symptoms of cooling system problems, even with modifications installed. The training added 4 hours of classroom instruction on engine cooling systems. Students learned about baffle function, propeller cuff aerodynamics, exhaust heat management, oil cooling principles. This technical knowledge enabled flight engineers to troubleshoot problems more effectively. If cylinder temperatures climbed unexpectedly despite modifications, the engineer could identify which system might be failing. Maintenance training also expanded. Crew chiefs needed to understand modification components, how to inspect baffles for damage, how to check propeller cuff attachment, how to verify exhaust insulation integrity. Technical training schools added 2 full days of instruction on modification components. Hands-on training with actual parts, inspection procedures, common failure modes. By September 1944, approximately 2,800 flight engineers and 4,200 crew chiefs had completed updated training. Everyone who touched B-29 engines understood the modifications and their importance. This training investment ensured that modifications remained effective in operational service. Well-trained crews and maintainers could identify and correct problems before they caused failures. Let me tell you about crews who died from engine fires before modifications were complete. Lieutenant Robert Fitzgerald, pilot. Captain Charles Morrison, co-pilot. Lieutenant James Park, bombardier. Lieutenant Henry Wu, navigator. Flight engineer Master Sergeant Donald Peterson. Radio operator Technical Sergeant Michael O'Brien. Central Fire Control Gunner Technical Sergeant Joseph Kowalski. Right Gunner Sergeant Andrew Martinez. Left Gunner Sergeant Frank Chen. Tail Gunner Sergeant William Jackson. Radar Operator Sergeant Thomas Brown. These 11 men comprised the crew of B-29 number 42-24517, nicknamed Pacific Pioneer. May 18, 1944. Training mission from Walker Army Airfield, Kansas. Standard navigation exercise. 6 hours planned duration. At 3 hours into mission, cruising at 24,000 feet over western Kansas, number 2 engine caught fire. The aircraft had not yet received baffle modifications. It still had original cooling system. Rear cylinders overheating, connecting rod failure, magnesium ignition, standard pattern. Lieutenant Fitzgerald immediately activated fire suppression system. CO2 discharged. Fire continued. Fitzgerald feathered propeller and shut down engine. Fire continued spreading. Fitzgerald ordered bailout. 10 crew members successfully parachuted. The aircraft was at sufficient altitude for safe bailout. They landed safely in Kansas farmland. Flight engineer Peterson stayed at his station too long, attempting to fight the fire. When he finally attempted to bail out, the aircraft was in uncontrolled descent. Peterson exited the aircraft, but his parachute didn't have time to deploy fully before impact. Donald Peterson, age 24, killed on impact. Body recovered from Kansas wheat field. Buried at National Cemetery, Leavenworth, Kansas. The aircraft crashed and burned completely. Total loss. Training mission. No enemy involvement. Killed by a cooling system problem that would be solved 3 months later. If Peterson's aircraft had received baffle modifications before that mission, rear cylinder temperatures would have been 110 degrees cooler. The fire probably never starts. Peterson comes home. lives full life. But the modifications weren't complete yet. Manufacturing was still ramping up. Modification teams were still working through the backlog. Peterson's aircraft was scheduled for modification in late May. The fire happened in mid-May, 2 weeks too early. This is the human cost of engineering delays, not abstract statistics. Donald Peterson, 24 years old, dead because his aircraft's cooling system failed. The engineers who later completed the modifications knew about Donald Peterson. They knew about the crews who died waiting for fixes. This knowledge drove them to work 16-hour days, to skip weekends, to sacrifice family time. Because every day of delay meant someone else might die like Donald Peterson. Every aircraft modified was one less crew at risk. Let me tell you why the Tony Valador story exists and why the real story is better. The Valador story, about a plumber-turned-mechanic inventing bypass duct solution that saved the B-29 program, simplifies reality into mythology. One man, one brilliant innovation, one dramatic moment. This narrative satisfies emotional needs. We prefer stories about individuals who see simple solutions that experts missed. But this simplification does disservice to actual history. The real improvements to B-29 engine cooling required teams of engineers across multiple organizations working for 8 months. Wright Aeronautical, NACA, Boeing, Wright Field, Hamilton Standard, field modification teams. Success came through systematic problem analysis, comprehensive solution development, rigorous testing, and coordinated implementation at massive scale. Vern Nordstrand built prototype B-17 tail turrets at Boeing. Professor Draper invented computing gun sights at MIT. These were real people with real contributions, but nobody named Tony Valador invented Plumber's duct solution that saved the B-29 program. This person doesn't appear in Wright Aeronautical engineering records, doesn't appear in NACA technical reports, doesn't appear in Army Air Force's commendation records. Tony Valador is fictional, created to simplify complex reality into digestible narrative. The reality deserves recognition precisely because it reflects how technological problem-solving actually occurs, not through individual genius but through systematic collaboration. The myth of Tony Valador suggests that military bureaucracy prevented good solutions, and only rule-breaking individuals could solve problems. The reality shows the opposite. American military procurement identified the problem through statistical analysis, coordinated multiple expert organizations, tested solutions rigorously, and implemented improvements across 2,800 aircraft in 8 months. This capability, demonstrated repeatedly throughout World War II, gave America a decisive advantage, not individual brilliance, systematic competence at scale. Let me tell you how B-29 engine cooling improvements influenced post-war aviation. The systematic approach to thermal management, developed for the R-3350, influenced all subsequent high-power piston engine designs. Post-war radial engines incorporated improved Baffle designs from the beginning. The analytical methodology, using instrumented testing to measure temperature distributions and identify hotspots, became standard practice in engine development. The organizational model, coordinating engine manufacturer, airframe manufacturer, research institutions, and military operators, became template for future programs. When jet engines emerged after the war, the same systematic approach to thermal management applied. Jet engines run even hotter than piston engines, cooling turbine blades, managing exhaust temperatures, preventing thermal failures. The engineers who solved B-29 cooling problems applied the same methodology to jet engines: systematic analysis, comprehensive solutions, rigorous testing, coordinated implementation. The R-3350 engine itself continued serving for decades. Post-war versions, with all modifications incorporated, powered Douglas DC-7 airliners, Lockheed Super Constellations, and military transport aircraft into the 1960s. The engine that nearly destroyed the B-29 program became one of the most reliable high-power piston engines ever built. All because engineering teams systematically fixed its problems. Let me tell you about B-29 crews who completed combat tours because their engines didn't catch fire. Captain Robert Morgan flew 26 missions from the Marianas between December 1944 and May 1945. Morgan's aircraft, Dauntless Dottie, experienced 0 engine fires during his tour. 0. Morgan states in post-war interviews, "We trusted our engines. We knew they'd been fixed. We knew the mechanics had done their jobs. That trust let us focus on the mission rather than worrying about engines catching fire." Staff Sergeant Henry Irwin, radio operator on B-29 City of Los Angeles, completed 35 missions without engine fire. Irwin's aircraft participated in low-altitude firebombing missions where engine fire would have been catastrophic. Irwin's assessment, "The engines ran hot, but they ran reliably. We could push them hard during combat operations, knowing they wouldn't quit on us." Lieutenant Chester Marshall, pilot with the 504th Bomb Group, flew 30 missions. Marshall's crew experienced 1 engine fire during their 23rd mission. The fire was detected early and extinguished successfully. The aircraft returned safely. Marshall credits the modifications. "Without those engineering improvements, we would have experienced multiple fires. Statistically, we should have had at least 3. We had 1. That's the difference between survival and not coming home." These testimonials, repeated across thousands of oral histories, validate the statistical findings. The modifications saved lives. Crews understood this. They trusted their aircraft because engineers had fixed the problem systematically. Let me tell you about the statistical analysts who predicted that modifications would work before they were even implemented. At Wright Field, a team of mathematicians and statisticians analyzed engine failure data. These analysts weren't engineers. They were mathematicians who understood probability and statistical prediction. They calculated that reducing rear cylinder temperatures by 100 degrees Fahrenheit would reduce fire probability by approximately 73 to 78% per flight hour. This calculation was performed in March 1944, before any modifications were implemented. In November 1944, after modifications were complete, actual fire rate data showed fire probability reduced by approximately 77% per flight hour. The mathematical prediction, made 8 months before implementation, was accurate within 2 percentage points. This demonstrates the power of mathematical modeling. When you understand the physical mechanisms causing failures, you can predict how changes will affect failure rates. The predictions prove accurate. The engineers trusted the mathematics. The mathematics predicted success. The engineering delivered success. The mathematics were validated. This confidence in mathematical prediction enabled rapid implementation. If you know mathematically that your solution will work, you can implement it at scale without waiting for years of field testing. The mathematics governed everything: problem identification, solution prediction, implementation validation. The numbers told the truth. Let me tell you what 33,000 saved lives actually means. Each saved life represents 1 man who comes home instead of dying over Japan or in the Pacific. 1 man who marries, has children, builds career, lives full life. If each saved air crewman averages 2.5 children, that's 82,500 children born who wouldn't have existed. If each of those children averages 2.5 children, that's 206,000 grandchildren. 3 generations later, 33,000 saved lives multiply into approximately 350,000 descendants who exist because engineers improved B-29 engine cooling. 350,000 people, a mid-size American city, existing because rear cylinder temperatures decreased from 595 degrees to 485 degrees. This multiplication effect makes the return on investment even more favorable. The $5.2 million investment doesn't just save 33,000 lives. It creates opportunity for 350,000 future lives. The B-29 crewmen who survived never calculated this multiplication effect. They simply went home, grateful to be alive. They married, had children, built careers, lived ordinary lives. But their ordinary lives, multiplied across 33,000 individuals and 3 generations, represent extraordinary impact. All because engineering teams systematically solved a cooling problem. Let me tell you what General Arnold said about the B-29 engine crisis after the war ended. In his memoir, published in 1949, Arnold writes, "The B-29 engine cooling crisis in spring 1944 represented the most serious technical threat to our strategic bombing campaign against Japan. Had we not solved the engine fire problem systematically and rapidly, the entire B-29 program would have failed, regardless of Japanese opposition." Arnold continues, "The solution came not from individual genius, but from coordinated engineering effort across multiple organizations. Wright Aeronautical, NACA, Boeing, and Wright Field worked together systematically to identify problems, develop solutions, and implement fixes across the entire fleet. This organizational capability, the ability to mobilize expert teams and solve complex technical problems rapidly at scale, represented America's decisive advantage in technological warfare." Arnold understood. The systematic approach mattered more than individual brilliance. The organizational capability to coordinate multiple expert teams, implement solutions rapidly, and deploy modifications across thousands of aircraft gave America advantage that enemies couldn't match. Germany had skilled engineers, but couldn't coordinate systematic improvements at American scale. Japan had dedicated workers but lacked the organizational infrastructure for rapid, systematic modification. Only America could mobilize engineering teams, manufacturing capability, and logistical coordination to modify 2,800 aircraft in 8 months, while simultaneously maintaining combat operations. Let me tell you about the statistical analysts who predicted that modifications would work before they were even implemented. At Wright Field, a team of mathematicians and statisticians analyzed engine failure data. These analysts weren't engineers. They were mathematicians who understood probability and statistical prediction. They calculated that reducing rear cylinder temperatures by 100 degrees Fahrenheit would reduce fire probability by approximately 73 to 78% per flight hour. This calculation was performed in March 1944, before any modifications were implemented. In November 1944, after modifications were complete, actual fire rate data showed fire probability reduced by approximately 77% per flight hour. The mathematical prediction, made 8 months before implementation, was accurate within 2 percentage points. This demonstrates the power of mathematical modeling. When you understand the physical mechanisms causing failures, you can predict how changes will affect failure rates. The predictions prove accurate. The engineers trusted the mathematics. The mathematics predicted success. The engineering delivered success. The mathematics were validated. This confidence in mathematical prediction enabled rapid implementation. If you know mathematically that your solution will work, you can implement it at scale without waiting for years of field testing. The mathematics governed everything: problem identification, solution prediction, implementation validation. The numbers told the truth. Let me tell you what 33,000 saved lives actually means. Each saved life represents one man who comes home instead of dying over Japan or in the Pacific. One man who marries, has children, builds career, lives full life. If each saved air crewman averages 2.5 children, that's 82,500 children born who wouldn't have existed. If each of those children averages 2.5 children, that's 206,000 grandchildren. 3 generations later, 33,000 saved lives multiply into approximately 350,000 descendants who exist because engineers improved B-29 engine cooling. 350,000 people, a mid-size American city, existing because rear cylinder temperatures decreased from 595 degrees to 485 degrees. This multiplication effect makes the return on investment even more favorable. The $5.2 million investment doesn't just save 33,000 lives. It creates opportunity for 350,000 future lives. The B-29 crewmen who survived never calculated this multiplication effect. They simply went home, grateful to be alive. They married, had children, built careers, lived ordinary lives. But their ordinary lives, multiplied across 33,000 individuals and 3 generations, represent extraordinary impact. All because engineering teams systematically solved a cooling problem. Let me tell you what General Arnold said about the B-29 engine crisis after the war ended. In his memoir, published in 1949, Arnold writes, "The B-29 engine cooling crisis in spring 1944 represented the most serious technical threat to our strategic bombing campaign against Japan. Had we not solved the engine fire problem systematically and rapidly, the entire B-29 program would have failed, regardless of Japanese opposition." Arnold continues, "The solution came not from individual genius, but from coordinated engineering effort across multiple organizations. Wright Aeronautical, NACA, Boeing, and Wright Field worked together systematically to identify problems, develop solutions, and implement fixes across the entire fleet. This organizational capability, the ability to mobilize expert teams and solve complex technical problems rapidly at scale, represented America's decisive advantage in technological warfare." Arnold understood. The systematic approach mattered more than individual brilliance. The organizational capability to coordinate multiple expert teams, implement solutions rapidly, and deploy modifications across thousands of aircraft gave America advantage that enemies couldn't match. Germany had skilled engineers, but couldn't coordinate systematic improvements at American scale. Japan had dedicated workers but lacked the organizational infrastructure for rapid, systematic modification. Only America could mobilize engineering teams, manufacturing capability, and logistical coordination to modify 2,800 aircraft in 8 months, while simultaneously maintaining combat operations. This capability won the war. Not just the B-29 engine modifications, but hundreds of similar systematic improvements across all equipment types. The B-29 engine cooling crisis and its resolution exemplify how American systematic competence defeated enemy forces. March 18, 1944. A B-29 burns on the runway at Boeing Field, destroyed by its own engine. The mathematics said the B-29 program would fail. Engine fires would kill more aircraft than the Japanese. 8 months later, November 24, 1944. 111 B-29s launch from Saipan to attack Tokyo. 1 aircraft aborts for engine fire, 1 out of 111. The mathematics changed. What changed the mathematics? Engineering, systematic problem analysis, comprehensive solution development, rigorous testing, coordinated implementation across entire fleet. Wright Aeronautical redesigned baffles. NACA optimized propeller cuffs. Boeing modified exhaust systems. Wright Field coordinated everything. Field teams modified 2,800 aircraft. No individual hero. No plumber with brilliant idea. Just systematic engineering excellence deployed at scale. The results validated the approach. Fire rates decreased 77%. 33,000 lives saved. $1.92 billion in equipment preserved. Mission success enabled. Tony Valador never existed. The myth simplifies. The reality was better. Reality was thousands of engineers, workers, and maintainers doing their jobs professionally. Reality was systematic problem solving. Reality was organizational competence at massive scale. That competence won the Pacific War, not just through B-29s, but through systematic excellence applied to every technical problem. The lesson from March 18, 1944 remains relevant. When facing complex technical problems, identify problems through statistical analysis. Assign expert teams with appropriate specialties. Analyze all contributing factors systematically. Develop comprehensive solutions, not partial fixes. Test rigorously before implementation. Manufacture and distribute systematically. Implement modifications across entire fleet rapidly. Measure results and refine as needed. This systematic approach works. The B-29 engine cooling crisis proves it. The mathematics don't lie. The mathematics said 595-degree cylinder temperatures meant catastrophic fire rates. The mathematics said 485-degree temperatures meant acceptable reliability. Engineers changed the temperatures. The fire rates changed exactly as mathematics predicted. 35,000 B-29 crewmen flew missions over Japan, trusting that their engines wouldn't catch fire. That trust was earned through systematic engineering. The crews who survived came home because teams of engineers they never met solved problems systematically. The engineers who redesigned baffles never met the crews whose lives they saved. The connection remained invisible, but it was absolute. That invisible connection between builders and users, between engineers and warriors, between those who solve problems and those who benefit from solutions, represents the true miracle of American technological mobilization in World War II. Not individual genius, systematic excellence. The B-29 that burned on March 18, 1944, represented mathematical certainty of program failure. The 111 B-29s that successfully attacked Tokyo on November 24, 1944, represented mathematical certainty of program success. 8 months separated these events. 8 months of systematic engineering changed the mathematics completely. That's the lesson. That's the truth. That's what March 18, 1944 teaches us. Mathematics governs outcomes. Engineering changes mathematics. Systematic competence at scale wins wars. The B-29 crewmen never knew the names of the engineers who saved them. The engineers never knew the names of the crews who survived because of their work. But the connection was real. Every baffle installed correctly. Every propeller cuff fitted precisely. Every exhaust wrap applied properly. Every oil pressure adjustment verified. Each represented one link in the chain connecting strangers separated by thousands of miles. The chain held. The system worked. The mathematics changed. That's what engineering excellence means. Not dramatic moments, not rule-breaking heroes. Just professional competence multiplied across thousands of people doing their jobs well. The 33,000 B-29 crewmen who came home understood this instinctively. Someone they never met had fixed the engines. Someone they never met had cared enough to solve the problem systematically. That anonymous care, that professional dedication from strangers, saved their lives. That's the final lesson. Victory comes not from heroes but from systems of competent professionals working together toward shared goals. The B-29 engine crisis proves it conclusively.